Good evening, you're watching OneVoice, brought to you by Asia One. I'm Kerry Alexandra. Tonight we're widening the lens on the escalating US-Israel-Iran conflict and asking how much of what we're seeing today is part of a much older pattern, a pattern of the United States repeatedly intervening, covertly and overtly, to remove foreign governments it deems hostile and replace them with more palatable leadership more aligned with their own strategic interests. From Operation Ajax in Iran to coups in Chile and Guatemala, from the Bay of Pigs invasion to more recently the war in Iraq, the removal of Nicolas Maduro in the middle of the night.
Don't ask me who's in charge because I'll give you an answer and it'll be very controversial.
What does that mean?
It means we're in charge.
Different continents, different decades, but critics say the same questionable logic. Remove leaders who resist Western dominance and install ones who don't. So tonight, as tensions between Washington, Tel Aviv and Tehran continue to simmer and frequently spit, we're asking, is the current confrontation with Iran really about regional stability and security, or is it about control? Because history tells us something critical. In 1953, the US and Britain orchestrated the overthrow of Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, after he nationalised oil resources, losing them a small fortune in oil revenue, and popped the recently much maligned in the media Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a ruler more aligned with Western interests, into his still warm seat. But that decision didn't stabilise Iran, far from it. In fact, somewhat unsurprisingly, it planted the seeds of the Iranian Revolution. Turns out people don't love other countries picking their leaders to suit their own agenda. A textbook case of what analysts now call blowback. And today, as Iran is mired in conflict with the West once again, some voices, particularly in Western policy circles, are quietly revisiting regime change beyond taking out one Khamenei to replace him with another younger Khamenei as an option. Even floating the name of the former Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, a controversial figure amongst Iranians themselves, making headlines a couple of weeks ago, not for any direct part in the recent rounds of diplomacy, but for being publicly confronted and splashed with tomato juice by members of the Iranian diaspora. A moment that perhaps raises deeper questions about the reality of where he actually fits into the picture in Iranian eyes. Could he actually realistically represent the will of the Iranian people, or is that, as a suggestion, even just a nostalgic project tied to Western strategic interests? And this takes us, to a degree, back to a question we've touched on before. Who gets to decide Iran's future, Washington or the Iranian people themselves? Because if history has shown us anything, it's that external interventions rarely end where they're intended to. From Iran in 1953 to Venezuela in 2025, regime change has often led not to stability, but to prolonged conflict, regional instability, and unintended consequences, like the rise of guerrilla and extremist groups to fill power vacuums left by the fall of established, ingrained, if undemocratic leadership, after one not chosen by the people they're supposed to rule was implanted by a foreign government. So tonight we're asking some more questions you'd struggle to get a straight answer on from the Trump administration. Is the US trying to repeat history in Iran? Is this about security or sustaining global dominance? And why does Washington continue to position itself as the ultimate decision maker in other nations' futures? Joining me tonight, President and CEO of the Terrorism Research and Analysis Consortium, Varian Khan, and Associate Professor of Political Science and International Relations, who specialises in Iraq and the wider Middle East, Ibrahim al-Marashi. Let's get into it. Let's start with the big picture. From Iran in 1953 to Iraq in 2003 to Venezuela in 2025. We see repeated US involvement in removing foreign leaders. So is this just the US maintaining global dominance through the old same strategy, regime change, or are there in fact simply isolated policy decisions shaped by specific circumstances?
I believe that the circumstances are unique and specific, but this is a consistent strategy.
Okay, and Mr. Marashi?
This is a post-Cold War playbook. So while each national circumstance is unique or objective is unique, there are some consistent themes such as controlling resources of foreign countries, whether it is oil in Venezuela or Iran, to the bananas of Guatemala. This is about American control of our other nations' resources.
Okay, and let's go back a little bit. Let's look at Operation Ajax, a democratically elected leader removed and replaced with a monarch aligned with Western interest. Did that moment fundamentally shape the origins of Iranian distrust towards the US, do you think? And are we still seeing the consequences of that earlier regime change play out today? Please, Varian.
Absolutely. LBJ's hidden hand strategy that led to the very first regime change is totally unfolded to what we see right now. And we still use that hidden hand strategy.
And Mr. Al-Marashi?
The 1953 coup is when America became the major villain in Iranian perception. Up until that point, the fear was either the Soviets or the British. And from that point onwards, 1953, America engineered that regime change. A young cleric named Ayatollah Khomeini was incensed by it, and the 1979 revolution, so more than 2 decades afterwards, was the reaction to that.
And does regime change ever end well, do you think? Looking at cases like Chile, Guatemala, Iraq, yes, leaders were removed, but what followed was instability, violence, and long-term backlash from the people whose leadership had been selected for them by a foreign power. So did the US really succeed in regime change goals, or did it just create more problems than it solved? Varian, let's start with you again.
It created more problems than it solved, and the U.S. has never been able to really execute and implement an exit strategy that would be good for the civilians that were left behind.
What kind of exit strategy do you think they needed?
Well, more ability to have for them to have an infrastructure in place so that they could rule for themselves, more support, and less just leaving.
And Ibrahim, your thoughts on this one?
In every case, usually a more repressive regime emerges that violates the human rights of the nation involved. So sure, from the American perspective, in Chile, the communists or socialists were booted out of power. Same with Iran after 1953. What occurs is just a repressed population, violation of human rights. America achieves a short-term victory, but in the long term, there's always some kind of form of blowback against the U.S.
So you don't think it's ever successful?
That someone fills the vacuum. I'm sorry.
No, so please go on.
I was saying that someone's going to come in and fill the vacuum once the U.S. is left. And unfortunately, Ibrahim's right that it's almost always a more repressive person or institution filling that vacuum.
Yep, 100%. And bringing it back to today, the US argues that Iran poses a regional and nuclear threat, but critics say it's more about neutralizing a government that refuses to align with their interests. So where does the truth lie? Legitimate security concerns, or is this just another chapter in a long-standing strategy of geopolitical control, do you think? Ibrahim, let's start with you this time.
America has never come to terms with the Islamic Republic of Iran that emerged in 1979. So I just see this as the ultimate culmination of a decades-long conflict. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. The U.S. probably mistakenly overreacted to whatever is left of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Probably this time around, there was an oversized influence of Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel on Trump's decision-making, but it occurred within a greater history of American-Iranian tensions.
100%.
I agree completely. I was going to say that it's both, actually. It's the West wanting to impose influence, but it also is at least a regional security concern.
Okay, why is it a regional security concern?
Because Iran often has haphazard mentality that wants to do what it wants, no matter what the consequences are on the rest of the world.
Okay, let's talk about the role of Donald Trump. We can't avoid him, and his administration's politics towards Iran. From withdrawing from the 2015 nuclear agreements to bombing Iran mid-peace talks this year, do you think these actions will ultimately bring any long-term stability or keep the US and Israel and Iran on a path of confrontation and ultimately carnage? Let's start with you, Varian.
Well, we are accelerating. There's no doubt about that. The fact that we bombed a sovereign nation without congressional approval makes it an aggression on our part.
And Ibrahim, your thoughts on this one?
It's let's look back. The 1991 Gulf War only lasted about 6 weeks, but I would argue 10 years later, the acts of 9/11 were in retaliation for that conflict. 1991 led to the 2003 Iraq War. So it's highly unlikely that this round of intense warfare is going to bring any near-term stability. I usually see the instability in a decades-long cycle of repercussions. This is what's most likely going to happen for the region and the world.
And
it's generational. It comes back to bite later.
No, please expand on that. Don't let me interrupt you. Please expand on that.
The children and teens of today experiencing the conflict then come forward as adults to bite back.
Within Iran, or as part of the diaspora, or?
I think it's universal. It doesn't have to necessarily apply to Iran alone. Once aggression starts happening within a certain nation, let's say, as Ibrahim's example was Iraq, it ends up, within a decade or so, coming back and back and back, depending on what the aggression was.
Yep, I think that's a reasonable assessment. And now to a sensitive issue for many Iranians. There's been conversations for months about Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, as a potential alternative leadership figure, but his father remains a deeply polarizing figure in Iran's history. So is this simply an attempt to repackage a past model of Western-aligned leadership, or is there genuine support for him within both Iran and the global Iranian diaspora today, do you think? Ibrahim, let's start with you.
I mean, within Iran, this is a person who hasn't seen the country since 1979. So, I mean, some Iranians maybe might have nostalgia about how Iran was under his father. That doesn't necessarily mean they would want the son to come back who has no connection to the country. Furthermore, yes, the Iranian diaspora is divided. So amongst Iranians in the U.S., he's somewhat popular. But he is not somebody who could be just simply reinstalled and bring stability to the country, by no means.
Do you think his political involvement sort of externally in any way sets him up for leadership, or no?
Well, he's also, he is tarnished because, I mean, number one, he would be seen not only as a puppet of the U.S., but he also forged closer relations with Israel. And I think in both of those regards, his legitimacy amongst, let's say, Iranians would be hurt. But I think the most damaging issue is just simply how long has he been removed from the country itself.
Okay, and Varian, what do you think?
That was a very good point. I actually had the word nostalgia in my head immediately. So there's always going to be that nostalgia wanting the glory days of Tehran back again. And that's a certain segment of the population. But there's always going to be the hardliners who are really committed to the current regime for religious reasons. The real question is the middle belt, like the majority in the middle, what do they really want? And how does that unfold for them? I don't think installing, a puppet is going to appease them.
I think you're probably right. We partially covered this next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. We recently saw an incident where Reza Pahlavi was publicly confronted and splashed with tomato juice by members of the Iranian diaspora. Some have dismissed this as par for the course in politics, a minor incident, but is it more than a symbolic rejection of his legitimacy as a leader? And does it then reflect a broader resistance among Iranians, even outside Iran, towards externally backed leadership figures? And what does that say about the legitimacy of any future regime change that puts him in power? What chance of success would it have?
Well, it's both, actually. I think that we tried this in Afghanistan and it didn't work. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it makes him illegitimate or not welcomed by the people, the Shah's son, but it definitely doesn't give him credibility either. So it's in between. It's both. You're right on both sides.
And Ibrahim?
Yeah, let's remember the diaspora is not just the former royalists. Iran had a robust history of leftist and communist parties that, helped make the revolution happen, but then found themselves exiled when the Islamic Republic came into being. So it's not surprising that even in the Iranian diaspora, that the Shah's son would be targeted. It just reflects the deep fissures within the diaspora, but let's not also forget fissures within Iran itself, so that, Iran wouldn't have this kind of consensus candidate in the figure of the exiled Shah's son.
At the heart of this, I guess the question is really, should any foreign power have a role in determining any other sovereign nation's leadership, or should that decision rest solely with its own population? What do you think about this, Ibrahim?
Well, we saw the experience with Iraq and next door Afghanistan. America tried to impose a regime in both cases. And in Afghanistan, it took 20 years, and America realized it failed and withdrew. In Iraq, only very recently has the government began to stabilize. But to this day, America intervenes, Iran intervenes. So that doesn't bode well for Iraqi stability. But remember, this isn't just the U.S. trying to impose a government. It's Trump, and Trump's pattern in all of this has been very erratic at the same time.
And Varian, your thoughts on this one?
It would be really simple. A sovereign nation should be able to decide for themselves who their leader should be. Yeah. Plain and simple.
No, I think that's hard to argue against. We've seen blowback before the 1953 coup leading to the 1979 revolution, the Iraq war contributing to the rise of ISIS, the power vacuum left after Gaddafi was removed from Libya. So is the current US approach towards Iran risking yet another cycle of unintended consequences, do you think? Varian, let's start with you.
Yes. I mean, but one thing we have to pay attention to is this Sunni-Shia divide here. And the Shia have been much more less likely to commit to asymmetric warfare as Sunnis have been.
And Ibrahim?
Oh, in terms of, you said it, unintended consequences. And, the historian Sir Lawrence Friedman said of this war, it's going to lead to unintended consequences. Who in the U.S., in the CIA under, Eisenhower's administration thought a regime change in 1953 would lead to the formation of an Islamic Republic in 1979? That's unintended consequences. Who would have thought the 1991 Gulf War might lead to blowback in the form of 9/11? Almost exactly a decade later. Those are unintended consequences. So I think that's the key word to, conclude with, is that the fighting might stop, but what's being unleashed are these hidden forces that result in this blowback, the unintended consequences of military action.
And if this pattern continues, what does it mean, not just for Iran, but for global stability, that one nation thinks it can choose its leader that suits it to rule another nation? Can the US's interventionism ever strengthen international order, or does it just slowly erode legitimacy? Varian, give me an expansive answer on this one.
Expansive, okay. No, it erodes legitimacy, for sure. Iran has historically had a seat at the table before the 1959 revolution or coup, but it's been isolated for the last 45 plus years. And in that isolation, they're very well aware of them being isolated. So that led to the whole blockade of the Strait. They're trying to exert themselves again on the world stage.
And Ibrahim?
In this particular case, let's remember 1991, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, the U.S. worked through the United Nations. They tried to bring the world into that conflict. 2001 was the retaliation, and what did America declare? A global war on terror. In other words, the whole world was going to be a battlefield, you see. And I would argue that destabilized international security. In this case, the destabilization is going to be geoeconomic. America, in this case, didn't even bother going through the UN. It went in unilaterally with Israel. The global geopolitical significance is how it will disrupt global energy supplies, global manufacturing. It's going to definitely have a geoeconomic destabilization effect.
You're talking there about the wide-ranging impact that come from this conflict. Where does this leave America, do you think? Like, how do you think this has damaged their position as the kind of sort of the hegemonic power? Where does this leave them at the end of this? Start with you, Varian.
It's damaged beyond imagination, in my opinion. There is going to be a lot of hard work to make to reestablish America as that binding force that will help the rest of the world. And right now, it's seeming to destabilize with more and more aggression.
And Ibrahim?
You know, I think around the world, there's been an awareness that this was a foolhardy decision. No country really has the courage to really stand up and tell basically the Trump administration that this was hugely damaging to world security, maybe with the exception of Spain. Within NATO, and then, of course, Russia and China also condemning the act. So, I mean, I think without a doubt, everyone realizes that the Trump administration is maybe a reckless force in global security. I don't know if a new administration could ever fix the damage done. But the idea that alliances like NATO are stable, enduring pacts, I think that is now a facade that will forever be questioned. The UN and international law has taken a permanent hit as a result of what's happened over the last couple of weeks as well. So I think international organizations and their future are going to be held in question as the US kind of acts more unilaterally.
Thank you for joining us. If history is anything to go by, it seems regime change is never just about removing a single troublesome leader. It's about what comes after, and time again, what follows has been anything but predictable and never stable. In Iran in 1953, Iraq in 2003, and the more recent removal of Maduro in Venezuela, the fallout from which still remains to be seen. The promise of stability has often given way to internal tensions, the collapse of established systems, and ultimately chaos. So as we watch this current round of geopolitical chess, perhaps the real question isn't whether the US can shape Iran's future, but whether it should. Because in the end, the right to decide a nation's leadership doesn't belong to any foreign power. It surely belongs to the people. You've been watching One Voice here on Asia One. I'm Kerry Alexandra. Thank you for joining us.